When you've been married for 40 years, you think you know every secret your husband keeps. You think the Bible he reads every morning holds only scripture and prayer. You think the man who stands before a congregation and preaches about truth and integrity lives those values in every corner of his life. I was wrong. My name is Evelyn Morrison, though most people call me Evie. I'm 62 years old, a retired librarian, and for the past 4 decades, I've been married to Thomas Morrison. Tom to his friends, Pastor Tom to the community we've served together in Maplewood, Vermont. Our life has been, by all accounts, picture perfect. We raised our son Danny in a home filled with love and faith. We hosted church potlucks in our backyard every summer. We celebrated baptisms and weddings and anniversaries with people who became more than neighbors. They became family. When Tom retired from his pastoral duties 3 years ago, we settled into a rhythm that felt like the reward for a life well lived. Sunday services, where we sat together in the third pew. Wednesday evening, Bible studies in our living room. Visits from Danny, his wife Sarah, and our 2 grandchildren, who filled our home with laughter and sticky fingerprints on the windows. I thought I knew everything about the man I married. I thought our life together was built on a foundation of honesty and shared faith. I thought the hardest thing we'd ever face was growing old together. I was wrong about all of it. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when everything changed. Tom had gone out to run errands, the grocery store, the post office, maybe a stop at the hardware store because he was always tinkering with something around the house. I was in the living room, settling into my favorite chair with a cup of tea and a novel I'd been meaning to finish for weeks. But I couldn't find my bookmark, one of those thin leather ones with a tassel that Tom had given me years ago for my birthday. I remembered seeing it recently, and then it hit me. I'd been reading in bed a few nights earlier, and Tom had been reading his Bible beside me. Maybe I'd accidentally tucked my bookmark into his Bible instead of my own book. It seemed like such a small thing, such an innocent mistake. I walked to his office, a cozy room lined with bookshelves filled with theology texts and commentaries and devotionals. His Bible sat on the desk where he left it every morning after his quiet time. I picked it up, feeling the worn leather cover, the pages soft and thin from years of use. I opened it carefully, flipping through the book of Psalms, because that's where I usually kept my bookmark when I was reading before bed. And that's when I saw it. Tucked between Psalm 32 and Psalm 33, right there in the middle of my favorite book of the Bible, was an envelope. Not my bookmark. An envelope. It was sealed, the kind of envelope you'd use for a formal letter, and it was addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize. Thomas Morrison. The return address was printed in the corner. Rebecca Hartley, Portland, Maine. I stared at it, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. The postmark caught my eye next. 10 years old. This letter had been sitting in Tom's Bible for a decade. My hands started to shake. I don't know if it was intuition or fear, or just the strangeness of finding something hidden in a place that should have held nothing but sacred text. But I knew before I even opened it, that whatever was inside this envelope was going to change everything. I stood there in Tom's office, holding that envelope, and I had a choice. I could put it back. I could pretend I never saw it. I could wait for Tom to come home and ask him about it, give him the chance to explain before I invaded his privacy. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fact that it had been hidden in his Bible, the one place I would never think to look unless I was searching for something innocent like a bookmark. Maybe it was the postmark, 10 years old, which meant he'd been keeping this secret for a decade. Maybe it was just the way my gut twisted with a feeling I couldn't name but couldn't ignore. I slid my finger under the seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, covered in the same unfamiliar handwriting. I unfolded it and began to read. The letter started with a name. Dear Tom, not Thomas. Tom. Familiar. Intimate. My eyes moved down the page, and with every sentence my world tilted further off its axis. My name is Rebecca Hartley. You may not remember me. It's been so many years. But we knew each other in college. We dated briefly before you met Evelyn. I'm writing to you now because I'm dying. The doctors have given me 6 months, maybe less, and there's something I need to tell you before I go. Something I should have told you a long time ago. I had to stop reading. I had to sit down. My legs felt weak, my chest tight. I sank into Tom's desk chair and forced myself to keep going. When we broke up, I was pregnant. I didn't know it at the time, but a few weeks later I found out. By then, you were already engaged to Evelyn. You looked so happy in the photos I saw, so full of hope and purpose. I couldn't bring myself to tell you. I didn't want to ruin your life. So I made the decision to raise our daughter on my own. Our daughter. The words blurred in front of me. I blinked hard, trying to focus, trying to make sense of what I was reading. Her name is Claire. She's 38 years old now, married, with 2 beautiful children of her own. I did my best to raise her, Tom. But it wasn't easy. My sister Linda helped me when I couldn't manage on my own. Claire has always known she had a father out there somewhere, but I never told her who you were. I told myself I was protecting you, protecting your family. But now I realize I was protecting myself from the guilt of keeping this secret. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the letter. I read on, my heart pounding in my ears. I'm not writing to ask for anything for myself. It's too late for that. But Claire deserves to know where she comes from. She deserves to know her father. I'm not asking you to disrupt your life, Tom. I'm not asking you to claim her publicly or change anything about the family you've built. But she has questions. She has a right to answers. Please, if you have any compassion, any sense of responsibility, meet her. Talk to her. Give her the truth she deserves. Please don't let my death be the end of her story. The letter was signed simply, Rebecca. I read it again, and then again. 3 times I read that letter, and each time it felt more surreal, more impossible. Tom had a daughter, a 38-year-old daughter named Claire, a daughter he'd never told me about. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the postmark, 10 years ago, which meant Tom had received this letter a decade ago and never said a word. He'd known about Claire for 10 years. 10 years of sitting beside me in church. 10 years of praying together before meals. 10 years of preaching to our community about honesty and integrity and living a life of truth. And he'd never told me. I felt sick. Physically sick. I set the letter down on the desk and pressed my hands to my stomach, trying to steady my breathing, trying to keep the nausea at bay. My mind raced backward, searching for clues, for signs, for anything that might have told me something was wrong. And then I remembered. 10 years ago, Tom had changed. It was subtle, the kind of change you might not notice if you weren't paying close attention. But I had noticed. He'd become more withdrawn, more introspective. He spent longer hours in his office, more time in prayer. I'd asked him once if something was bothering him, if there was something he wanted to talk about. He'd looked at me with those kind, tired eyes and said he was wrestling with God, working through some spiritual questions. I'd believed him. I'd trusted him. I'd even admired him for his dedication to his faith. And all along, he'd been hiding this. I don't know how long I sat there in his office, staring at that letter, trying to process what I'd just learned. It could have been minutes. It could have been an hour. Time felt strange, elastic, like it had stopped meaning anything. All I knew was that the life I thought I had, the marriage I thought I had, was a lie. And then I heard the front door open. Tom's voice called out, cheerful and light. "Evie, I'm home. I picked up those apples you wanted for the pie." I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, the letter in my hands, waiting. I heard his footsteps in the hallway, heard him set the grocery bags down in the kitchen. And then he appeared in the doorway of his office, smiling, until he saw me, until he saw the letter. The colour drained from his face. His smile vanished. He stood there, frozen, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find words that wouldn't come. Finally, he managed to speak. "Evie, I can explain." My voice, when it came, was cold, controlled. I didn't recognize it as my own. "You have a daughter?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a fact. Tom's legs seemed to give out beneath him. He collapsed into the chair across from the desk, his head falling into his hands. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. And then I asked the questions I needed answers to, even though I wasn't sure I could handle the truth. "How long have you known?" My voice was steady, but inside I was screaming. "Did you meet her? Does Danny know? Does anyone know?" Tom looked up at me, his eyes red, his face crumpled with guilt. "I've known for 10 years, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since I got the letter. I never met her. I never reached out. I was too afraid." "Afraid of what?" I demanded. "Afraid of losing you," he said, and his voice broke. "Afraid of the scandal. Afraid of what it would do to our family, to the church, to everything we've built." I didn't know what to do, Evie, so I did nothing. I stared at him, this man I'd spent 40 years of my life with, and I didn't recognize him. "So you chose to lie to me," I said slowly. "Every single day for 10 years. Every morning when you read that Bible. Every Sunday when you stood in front of our church and preached about honesty and integrity. Every night when you lay beside me and said you loved me. You were lying." "I do love you," Tom said desperately. "I've always loved you. That's why I couldn't tell you. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." "You didn't lie to protect me," I said, and my voice was shaking now, the control slipping. "You lied to protect yourself, and in the process, you abandoned a woman, a daughter, who deserved to know her father. You let her spend 38 years wondering where she came from. You let her grow up without you. And you let me live in a marriage built on a lie." Tom was crying now, his shoulders shaking, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no compassion, just a cold, hollow ache where my heart used to be. I stood up, folded the letter carefully and walked out of the office. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't be in that room with him anymore. I couldn't be in that house. Not yet. Not until I figured out what to do with the truth that had just shattered everything I thought I knew. I couldn't stay in that house. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air too thick to breathe. I grabbed my purse and my keys, and I walked out the front door without saying a word. Behind me, I heard Tom's voice, desperate and breaking. "Evie, please, don't go." But I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at him, if I stopped moving, I was afraid I'd shatter completely. So I got in my car and I drove. I didn't have a destination in mind at first. I just needed to be anywhere but there. Anywhere but in that house, where 40 years of my life suddenly felt like a carefully constructed illusion. But then, almost without thinking, I found myself pulling into the driveway of Maggie Tavares's home. Maggie has been my best friend for over 30 years. We met when our sons were in elementary school together, and we've been through everything side by side: raising kids, burying parents, celebrating grandchildren, navigating the strange terrain of retirement. If there was anyone in the world I could trust with this, it was Maggie. She opened the door before I even knocked, probably because she saw me pull up and recognized the look on my face. She didn't ask questions. She just pulled me inside, wrapped her arms around me, and let me fall apart. I don't know how long I stood there in her entryway, sobbing into her shoulder. But eventually she guided me to her kitchen table and made me a cup of tea I didn't drink. And then I told her everything. I told her about the letter, about Rebecca, about Claire. I told her about the 10 years of silence, the decade of lies. Maggie listened without interrupting, her face shifting from shock to disbelief to something that looked like grief. When I finally finished, she sat back in her chair and shook her head slowly. "Tom?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pastor Tom? The man who counseled half this town on honesty and integrity?" I nodded, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. "He's been lying to me for 10 years, Maggie. Every single day. Every morning when he kissed me goodbye. Every night when he told me he loved me. Every Sunday when he stood in that pulpit and preached about living a life of truth. He was lying." Maggie reached across the table and took my hand. She didn't offer empty reassurances or try to minimize what I was feeling. She just asked the questions I needed someone else to voice. "Did he cheat on you?" she asked gently. "No," I said. "This was before we met. Before we were even engaged." "Did he know about the pregnancy at the time?" "No. Rebecca never told him. She found out after they'd already broken up, and by then Tom and I were together. She made the choice to raise Claire on her own." Maggie nodded slowly, processing. "So he found out 10 years ago, when he got the letter, and he just did nothing?" "Exactly," I said, and the word came out bitter. "He did nothing. He hid the letter in his Bible and pretended it didn't exist." Maggie was quiet for a moment, and I could see her wrestling with something. Finally, she spoke. "Evie, I'm not defending him. What he did was wrong. But I think I understand why he did it. He was terrified. Terrified of losing you. Terrified of what the truth would do to your marriage, to your family, to his reputation in the church. So he chose to protect himself," I said, my voice rising. "He chose his own comfort over honesty. He chose to keep me in the dark instead of trusting me with the truth. And in the process, he abandoned a woman, a daughter, who deserved to know her father. Claire has spent her entire life wondering where she came from, and Tom could have given her answers. But he didn't, because he was too much of a coward." Maggie didn't argue with me. She just squeezed my hand and said, "What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But sitting there in Maggie's kitchen, something shifted inside me. The shock was beginning to wear off, and in its place was something sharper, something more focused. I needed to know more. I needed to understand who Claire was, what her life looked like, whether she was still searching for the father who'd refused to acknowledge her. Maggie let me use her laptop, and I opened a browser and typed in the name from the letter. Claire Donovan, Portland, Maine. It took less than a minute to find her. Her Facebook profile was semi-public, the kind of privacy setting that lets strangers see some photos but not everything. I clicked on her profile picture and felt my breath catch. She was beautiful. Dark hair, warm eyes, a smile that seemed genuine and kind. But it wasn't just her beauty that stopped me. It was the resemblance. She looked exactly like Tom's mother. I'd only known Tom's mother for a few years before she passed away, but I remembered her face clearly. The same eyes, the same shape of the smile, even the same way her hair fell around her face. There was no mistaking it. This woman was Tom's daughter. I scrolled through her photos, my heart pounding. Claire was a nurse. She was married. She had 2 young children, a boy and a girl, who looked to be around 5 and 7 years old. There were photos of family vacations, birthday parties, quiet moments at home. She looked happy. She looked like someone who'd built a good life despite the absence of a father. And yet, in some of the photos, I could see something in her eyes, a kind of searching, a question that hadn't been answered. I zoomed in on one particular photo, a selfie she'd posted a few months ago with a caption that read, "Still figuring out where I belong." My chest tightened. This woman, this stranger who was also my husband's daughter, was still looking for answers. And Tom had those answers. He'd had them for 10 years. But he'd chosen silence. I closed the laptop and looked at Maggie. "I need to go home," I said. She nodded, understanding. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No," I said. "I need to do this alone." I drove back to the house late that night, long after dark. The lights were off, except for a single lamp in the living room. I let myself in quietly and found Tom asleep on the couch, still fully dressed, his face puffy and red from crying. I didn't wake him. Instead, I went straight to his office. I knew his laptop password, or at least, I thought I knew everything about him. Funny how a single day can make you question 40 years of certainty. I opened his email and searched for Claire's name. What I found made my stomach turn. There was a folder labeled Unread Claire. 17 emails, 17 messages from a daughter trying to reach her father, and Tom had never opened a single one. I clicked on the first email, sent 6 months ago, and began to read. "Dear Tom, my name is Claire Donovan. My mother, Rebecca Hartley, passed away 10 years ago. Before she died, she told me about you. She told me you were my father. I've spent the last decade trying to decide whether to reach out, and I've finally found the courage. I'm not looking for money or trying to disrupt your life. I just want to know where I come from. I just want to understand who I am." I clicked on the next email, sent a month later. "I know this must be a shock. I'm sorry if my first email upset you, but I'm hoping we can talk, even just once. I have so many questions. Did you know about me? Did my mother ever tell you? Do you ever think about me?" Another email, 2 months after that. "I have 2 children. Your grandchildren. They ask me about their grandfather sometimes, and I don't know what to tell them. I don't know if you even want to know about them. But they exist, and they're beautiful, and I wish you could meet them." The emails went on, each one a little more desperate, a little more heartbroken. And then, 2 weeks ago, the final message. "I understand if you don't want contact. I understand if this is too complicated, too painful, too disruptive. I'll stop reaching out. I'm sorry for intruding on your life. I hope you're happy. I hope you have a good family. I hope you never have to wonder where you came from the way I have." I sat there staring at the screen, tears streaming down my face. But they weren't tears of sadness for myself anymore. They were tears of rage and heartbreak for Claire. This woman had been begging for acknowledgement, for connection, for the most basic human need to know where she came from. And Tom had ignored her. He'd let her messages sit unread in a folder while he went about his life, preaching and praying and pretending everything was fine. I heard movement behind me and turned to see Tom standing in the doorway, his eyes wide and red-rimmed. "Evie?" he said, his voice hoarse. "What are you doing?" I stood up, my hands shaking. "You didn't just hide the letter," I said, my voice cold and controlled. "You've been ignoring her emails for months. She's been reaching out to you, begging you for just one conversation, and you couldn't even be bothered to read what she had to say." Tom's face crumpled. "I didn't know what to say," he stammered. "I didn't want to hurt you." "So you hurt her instead," I shot back. "A woman who lost her mother. A woman who just wants to know her father. A woman who has spent her entire life feeling incomplete. And you had the power to give her answers. But you chose to do nothing." "I was a coward," Tom said, his voice breaking. "I know. I've been praying for guidance, but I froze. I didn't know how to fix it." "You've been praying," I said, and I could hear the bitterness in my own voice. "You've been hiding. There's a difference. Prayer isn't supposed to be an excuse for inaction, Tom. It's supposed to give you the courage to do what's right. And you've had 10 years to find that courage, and you never did." "What do you want me to do?" Tom asked desperately. "I don't know," I said. "But I know I can't be near you right now. I can't look at you. I can't sleep in the same room as you. I need space to figure out what I'm going to do." I walked past him and went upstairs to the guest room, closing the door behind me. I heard him standing in the hallway for a long time, but he didn't knock. He didn't try to follow me. And I was grateful for that, because I didn't have anything left to say to him. The next morning was Sunday, and Danny showed up at our door just after 9 o'clock, the way he always did. He brought Sarah and the kids, expecting the usual routine, coffee and conversation while the grandchildren played in the backyard. But the moment he walked in and saw our faces, he knew something was wrong. Tom and I were sitting at opposite ends of the kitchen table, not speaking, not looking at each other. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Danny sent Sarah and the kids outside and then turned to us, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Mum? Dad? What's going on?" I looked at Tom, waiting. This was his secret, his lie, his responsibility to explain. Tom's hands were shaking as he set down his coffee cup. "Danny?" he said, his voice barely steady. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." And then, haltingly, painfully, Tom told our son about Claire. He told him about Rebecca, about the letter, about the 10 years of silence. I watched Danny's face as he listened, watched the shock and confusion give way to anger. When Tom finished, Danny just stared at him. "I have a sister," he said slowly. "And you never told us?" "I was afraid," Tom said. "I didn't know how to—" "You didn't know how to tell the truth?" Danny interrupted, his voice rising. "You're a pastor, Dad. You've spent your entire life telling other people how to live with integrity, and you couldn't even be honest with your own family." He turned to me, his eyes searching my face. "Did you know, Mum?" "I found out 2 days ago," I said quietly. Danny shook his head, his jaw tight. "I can't believe this. I can't believe you, Dad." And then he walked out, slamming the door behind him. Tom buried his face in his hands, and I sat there in the silence, wondering how we were ever going to put our family back together, wondering if we even could. I spent that night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind kept circling back to those emails, to Claire's words, to the desperation and hope and eventual resignation in her messages. I kept thinking about what it must have been like for her, growing up without a father, wondering where she came from, searching for answers that Tom could have given her with a single conversation. And I kept thinking about Tom, about the man I thought I knew, about the gap between who he claimed to be and who he actually was. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I did something I hadn't been able to do since I found that letter. I prayed. Not the kind of prayer I'd been taught in church, not the formal, structured words I'd recited for decades. Just an honest, raw conversation with God about what I was supposed to do with this mess. And in the quiet of that guest room, an answer came. Not in words, not in some dramatic revelation, but in a simple, clear knowing. Claire was innocent in all of this. She didn't ask to be born. She didn't ask to grow up without a father. She didn't deserve to be ignored. And if Tom wasn't going to do the right thing, then maybe I could. By the time the sun came up, I'd made my decision. I was going to meet Claire. With or without Tom's blessing, with or without his knowledge, I was going to reach out to this woman and give her what she deserved. Acknowledgement, answers, and maybe, if I could manage it, some kind of connection to the father who'd been too afraid to claim her. I waited until Tom left the house that morning. He mumbled something about needing to clear his head, and I didn't ask where he was going. I didn't care. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I opened my laptop and pulled up Claire's last email. The one where she'd said she understood if Tom didn't want contact. The one where she'd apologized for intruding. I hit reply and started typing. Dear Claire, my name is Evelyn Morrison. I'm Tom's wife. I recently discovered your mother's letter, and I want you to know how deeply sorry I am for the silence you've endured. You didn't deserve that. You deserve answers, and you deserve to be acknowledged. If you're willing, I would very much like to meet you. I read it over 3 times before I hit send, my heart pounding. I didn't know what kind of response I'd get, or if I'd get one at all. For all I knew, Claire had moved on, decided she was done trying to connect with a father who clearly didn't want her. But less than 2 hours later, my phone chimed with a new email notification. Mrs. Morrison, I don't know what to say. I never expected to hear from you. I'm honestly shocked, and I'm not sure what this means. But yes, I would like to meet you. Thank you for reaching out. It means more than you know. I booked a train ticket to Portland for the next day. I didn't tell Tom where I was going. I didn't owe him that information. Not after what he'd kept from me. The train ride felt endless. I spent the 3 hours staring out the window, watching the Vermont countryside give way to the coast of Maine, trying to prepare myself for what I was about to do. I was about to meet my husband's daughter, a woman I'd never known existed until a few days ago, a woman whose very existence had upended everything I thought I knew about my life. What was I supposed to say to her? How was I supposed to explain Tom's silence without making excuses for him? How was I supposed to look her in the eye and tell her that the father she'd been searching for was too much of a coward to respond? By the time the train pulled into Portland, I still didn't have answers to any of those questions. But I got off anyway, and I made my way to the cafe we'd agreed to meet at, a small place in the old Port District that Claire had suggested. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, clutching a coffee cup with both hands. I recognized her immediately from her photos, but seeing her in person was different. She looked so much like Tom's mother that it took my breath away. The same dark eyes, the same shape of her face, even the same way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. She looked up as I approached, and our eyes met. And I saw the same shock of recognition in her face. She stood up, awkward and uncertain, and for a moment neither of us knew what to do. And then she started crying. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I didn't mean to disrupt your life. I didn't mean to cause problems. I just— Stop, I said gently, sitting down across from her. You didn't disrupt anything. Tom's silence did. You have nothing to apologize for. We sat there for a moment, just looking at each other, and then Claire took a shaky breath and started talking. She told me about her mother, about Rebecca's struggles as a single parent, about how she'd worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. She told me about her Aunt Linda, Rebecca's sister, who'd eventually taken over raising Claire when Rebecca's health started to decline. She told me about growing up always feeling like something was missing, like there was a piece of her story she didn't have access to. I always knew I was different, Claire said, her voice soft. I looked different from my mom and my aunt. I had questions they couldn't answer. And when I was 18, Aunt Linda finally told me the truth. She told me my father was out there somewhere, that my mum had loved him once, but things hadn't worked out. She didn't tell me his name, though. My mum made her promise not to, not until after she was gone. Claire's hands were shaking as she spoke, and I reached across the table and took one of them in mine. She looked surprised, but she didn't pull away. My mum died when I was 28, Claire continued. Cancer. It was fast and brutal, and by the end she was so weak she could barely speak. But before she died, she told Aunt Linda about the letter. She'd written it years earlier, when she first got her diagnosis, and she'd left instructions for it to be delivered to Tom, but only after Aunt Linda passed away too. I think she was trying to protect everyone. Protect Tom's family. Protect me from potential rejection. Protect herself from having to face the consequences of her choices. Claire's voice broke, and she paused to wipe her eyes again. Aunt Linda died 6 months ago, and when I was going through her things, I found the letter. I found my father's name. I found his address. And I thought, finally I'm going to get answers. So I sent the letter to him, and then I waited. And when I didn't hear anything, I started sending emails. I tried to be respectful, tried not to push too hard, but I just needed to know. I needed to know if he even knew I existed. I needed to know if he ever thought about me. She looked at me, her eyes red and pleading. Did he? Did he ever think about me? I felt my own tears starting to fall. Yes, I said. He thought about you. He's thought about you every day for the past 10 years. But he was too afraid to reach out, too afraid of what it would mean, what it would cost him. And I know that's not good enough. I know that doesn't make up for the silence. But I need you to know that his failure to respond wasn't about you. It was about his own cowardice. Claire pulled out her phone and showed me photos of her children, a boy and a girl, ages 5 and 7. They had Tom's eyes, Danny's smile. They were beautiful. They ask about their grandfather sometimes, Claire said quietly. My husband's father passed away before they were born, so they don't have a grandfather on either side. And I never knew what to tell them. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to tell them their grandfather didn't want to know them. I looked at those photos, at those innocent faces, and something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about Tom and me anymore. This wasn't just about a secret and a lie. This was about a family that had been fractured by fear, and about children who deserved to know where they came from. I'm going to make sure you meet him, I said, and I meant it. I don't know how, and I don't know when, but I promise you, Claire, I will make sure you get the chance to know your father. Claire's face crumpled, and she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not hating me. Thank you for being here. I could never hate you, I said. You're a victim of Tom's silence, just like I am. and we both deserve better. Back in Maplewood, Tom was falling apart. I didn't know it at the time, but Maggie told me later that she'd stopped by the house to check on him and found him in his office, unshaven, dishevelled, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the desk. Tom never drank whiskey. He barely drank at all. But there he was, drowning in guilt and self-pity, staring at Rebecca's letter like it held the answers to questions he was too afraid to ask. Maggie had tried to talk sense into him. "You need to fix this, Tom," she'd said, "before you lose everything." But Tom had just shaken his head, his eyes hollow. "I've already lost everything. Evie won't even look at me." Maggie had wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, but she couldn't. Because in that moment, it was true. Danny had come by later that same day and found his father in the same state. He'd walked into the office, seen the whiskey, seen the brokenness in Tom's face, and his anger had flared hot and immediate. "Dad, what are you doing?" Danny had demanded. Tom had looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I ruined everything, Danny. I'm a fraud. I preached honesty for 30 years. And I'm a liar." "Yeah, you are," Danny had said, his voice hard. "But sitting here feeling sorry for yourself isn't fixing anything. You think this is hard for you? Think about Mom. Think about Claire. Think about everyone you've hurt with your silence." "What do you want me to do?" Tom had asked, his voice breaking. "I want you to meet your daughter," Danny had said. "I want you to apologize to Mom. I want you to be the man you taught me to be. The man you've been pretending to be all these years." Tom had broken down then, sobbing into his hands. "I'm scared, Danny. What if Claire hates me? What if Evie never forgives me? What if I've destroyed everything that matters?" "Then you deal with it," Danny had said, his voice softening just slightly. "You face the consequences of your choices, but you don't get to hide anymore, Dad. You don't get to take the easy way out." I came home that evening just as the sun was setting. Tom was waiting for me in the living room, sober now, his eyes red but clear. He stood up when I walked in, his hands trembling. "Where were you?" he asked, and there was something in his voice. Fear, maybe? Or desperation? I set my purse down and looked at him directly. "Portland," I said. "I met Claire." The colour drained from Tom's face. He sank back down onto the couch, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find words. You met her?" he finally managed. "I did what you should have done 10 years ago," I said, my voice steady. "I reached out to her. I apologized for the silence. I sat with her in a cafe and I listened to her story. And Tom? She's lovely. She's kind and thoughtful. And she has your mother's eyes. She has 2 children, your grandchildren, who look just like Danny did when he was their age. She's been searching for you her entire life, and you've been hiding from her." Tom was sobbing now, his whole body shaking. "I'm so sorry, Evie. I'm so, so sorry. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make it right." I stood there looking at him. This man I'd loved for 40 years. This man who'd betrayed me in the deepest way possible. And I felt something harden inside me. "Sorry isn't enough," I said. "You have a choice to make, Tom. You can meet Claire. You can face what you've done and try to make it right. Or you can keep hiding. But if you choose to hide, if you choose your fear over doing what's right, then I'm done. I won't stay married to a coward. I won't spend the rest of my life with a man who can't live up to the values he claims to believe in." Tom looked up at me, his face streaked with tears. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to decide who you want to be," I said. "And you need to decide soon." Because I'm not waiting another 10 years for you to find your courage. The morning after I gave Tom my ultimatum, I woke up in the guest room to find him standing in the doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were red and swollen, his face pale, but there was something different in his expression, something that looked almost like resolve. "I'll meet her," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "You're right. I've been a coward long enough. I need to face what I've done. I need to meet my daughter." I sat up slowly, studying his face, trying to determine if this was real or just another moment of panic-driven promises he wouldn't keep. But something in his eyes told me he meant it this time. Maybe it was the ultimatum. Maybe it was Danny's words. Maybe it was just that he'd finally hit rock bottom and realized he had nowhere left to fall. Whatever it was, I chose to believe him. I called Claire that afternoon. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number, and when she answered, I could hear the hope and fear tangled together in her voice. "Claire, it's Evelyn. Tom wants to meet you. If you're still willing, we'd like to invite you to our home next Saturday." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might say no, might tell me it was too late, that she'd moved on. But then she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "I've waited 38 years, she said. "I can wait one more week." The days leading up to that Saturday were some of the longest of my life. I threw myself into cleaning the house, scrubbing floors that were already clean, reorganizing closets that didn't need organizing. It was nervous energy, the kind that comes when you don't know what else to do with the anxiety building inside you. Tom was a wreck. He barely ate. He barely slept. I'd hear him pacing in his office late at night, and once I found him sitting at the kitchen table at 3 in the morning, just staring at nothing. Danny called and offered to be there for the meeting, to provide support, and I agreed immediately. I think we both needed him there, needed someone to anchor us to reality when everything felt like it was spinning out of control. The morning of the meeting, I found Tom in his office holding Rebecca's letter. He was reading it again, his hands trembling, tears streaming down his face. I stood in the doorway watching him for a moment before I spoke. "She's not coming here to punish you, Tom," I said quietly. "She's coming because she wants a father. She's coming because she's been searching for you her whole life, and she finally has the chance to find you." Tom looked up at me, his face twisted with fear and guilt. "What if I can't be what she needs? What if I'm not enough? What if she takes one look at me and realizes I'm not worth knowing?" "Then you try anyway," I said. "You show up. You tell the truth. You let her decide what she needs from you. But you don't get to make that choice for her. Not anymore." Claire arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. I watched from the living room window as her car pulled into the driveway, watched as she sat there for a long moment before getting out. She'd come alone. Her husband had stayed home with the children to give her space. To let this first meeting be just about her and Tom. When the doorbell rang, Tom stood frozen in the hallway. I thought for a moment he might bolt, might run back to his office and lock the door. But then he took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and opened the door. They stood there staring at each other, father and daughter, strangers who shared blood and bone and a lifetime of absence. Claire spoke first, and the word came out broken and tentative. "Hi, Dad." Tom's face crumpled. He started crying immediately, right there in the doorway, and the words tumbled out of him in a rush. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have reached out. I should have been there. I'm so sorry." Claire was crying too, and for a moment they just stood there, Two people drowning in decades of loss and longing. Then I stepped forward and gently guided them both into the living room where Danny was waiting. We sat down, the four of us, in a circle of chairs that felt both too close and not close enough. At first, the conversation was awkward, stilted, full of the kind of small talk people use when they don't know how to bridge an impossible gap. But then Claire took a breath and asked the questions she'd come to ask, the questions she deserved answers to. "Why didn't you reach out when you got my mother's letter?" she asked, her voice steady but her hands shaking. "Did you ever think about me before that? Do you regret that I exist?" Tom didn't look away. He didn't make excuses. He just told her the truth, painful and raw and honest. "I was terrified," he said. "When I got your mother's letter, I was terrified. Terrified of losing Evie. Terrified of what it would do to our family. Terrified of the scandal. Terrified of facing my own failure. I told myself I was protecting everyone. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. I was a coward." He paused, wiping his eyes, and then continued. "I didn't know you existed until 10 years ago. Your mother never told me she was pregnant. But once I found out, once I read that letter, I thought about you every day. I wondered what you looked like, what kind of person you'd become, whether you were happy. I wondered if you hated me. I wondered if you even knew about me. And every day I told myself I'd reach out tomorrow, and then tomorrow would come and I'd find another excuse to wait." Claire was crying openly now, and Tom's voice broke as he answered her last question. "Do I regret that you exist? No. God, no. I regret my cowardice. I regret the years we lost. I regret that I wasn't there for your first steps, your first day of school, your graduation, your wedding. I regret that I let fear keep me from knowing you. But I don't regret you. I could never regret you." Then it was Claire's turn to share her story. She told us about growing up feeling incomplete, about always sensing that something was missing. She told us about her mother's struggles, about Rebecca working 2 jobs to keep them afloat, about her Aunt Linda stepping in when Rebecca's health failed. She told us about the questions that haunted her childhood, about the moment when she finally learned the truth about her father, about the decade she spent trying to decide whether to search for him. "I don't need you to be perfect," Claire said, looking directly at Tom. "I just need you to be present. I need you to show up. That's all I've ever wanted." Tom nodded, his face wet with tears. "I will be," he promised. "I swear to you, I will be. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right, if you'll let me." After a while, Claire pulled out her phone and called her husband. Within minutes, 2 small faces appeared on the screen, a boy and a girl with wide eyes and shy smiles. Tom's grandchildren. The children he'd never known existed until a few weeks ago. "Kids, this is your Grandpa Tom," Claire said, her voice gentle. The little girl, the younger of the two, tilted her head and studied Tom's face through the screen. "Are you really our grandpa?" she asked. Tom's voice was shaking so badly he could barely speak. "I am," he managed, "and I can't wait to meet you in person." The little boy, more reserved, asked, "Do you live far away?" "Not too far," Tom said, "and I promise, I'm going to visit you very soon." I sat there watching this exchange, watching Tom meet his grandchildren for the first time, and I felt something shift inside me. My heart was breaking and healing at the same time, cracking open to make room for a truth I hadn't been ready to accept. This was real. This family, fractured and complicated and painful as it was real. And somehow, we were going to have to find a way to make it work. After the video call ended, Danny, who'd been quiet through most of the meeting, stood up and walked over to Claire. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry our dad, put you through this. I'm sorry you had to grow up without him." Claire looked up at him, surprised. "It's not your fault," she said. "I know," Danny replied, "but I'm still sorry, and I'm glad you're here. I always wanted a sibling." He held out his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, Claire stood and hugged him. It was awkward and tentative, but it was genuine. And as I watched my son embrace his half-sister, I felt the first real flicker of hope I'd felt since this whole nightmare began. The weeks that followed were hard. Healing always is. Tom and I started attending marriage counseling with Pastor Ruth Emberley, a woman who'd taken over the pastoral duties at our church after Tom retired. She was compassionate, but firm, refusing to let either of us hide behind easy answers or comfortable lies. She made us talk about the hard things, the painful things, the things we'd been avoiding for years, even before the secret came out. Tom also started meeting with Claire regularly. Coffee dates, walks in the park, long conversations about everything and nothing. Claire brought her children to Maplewood, and Tom met them in person, and I watched as he read them stories and pushed them on the swings and tried to make up for decades of absence in small, tender moments. Danny and Claire began building their own relationship, discovering they had more in common than just DNA. They both loved hiking. They both had a dry sense of humor. They both had complicated feelings about the father they shared. I processed my own pain with Maggie and in therapy, working through the anger and betrayal and grief. And slowly, painfully, I began to see Tom differently. Not as the man I thought he was, but as the man he actually was. Flawed, broken, but trying. Really trying. He was attending therapy. He was reading books about accountability and fatherhood. He was writing letters to Claire, apologizing, explaining, asking for forgiveness. He was becoming the man he should have been 10 years ago. And I realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't about whether Tom deserved it. It wasn't about whether he'd earned it or proven himself worthy. Forgiveness was about me choosing peace over bitterness, choosing healing over anger. It was about deciding what kind of person I wanted to be, what kind of life I wanted to live. And I chose to forgive. Not because it was easy, not because the pain was gone, but because I deserved peace, and holding on to anger was only hurting me. 3 months after that first meeting, I decided to host a family dinner. I invited everyone: Tom, Danny, Sarah, Claire, Claire's husband, and the children. It felt important somehow to gather everyone together, to try to create something that looked like family, even if it didn't feel quite right yet. The evening started awkwardly. There were forced smiles and careful conversation, everyone trying too hard to make things comfortable. But then Claire's 5-year-old daughter, the one with Tom's mother's eyes, walked up to Tom holding a children's Bible she'd found on the bookshelf. "Grandpa, will you read me a story?" she asked. Tom's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded and pulled her onto his lap. It was the same Bible he'd read to Danny 30 years ago, worn and familiar. He opened it to the story of the prodigal son, and as he read, his voice steady and warm, something in the room shifted. The tension eased. The forced smiles became real. And for the first time since this all began, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. After dinner, Claire pulled me aside into the kitchen. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for reaching out, for making this possible. I know it couldn't have been easy." "You deserved a father," I said. "I'm sorry it took so long." Claire studied my face for a moment. "Are you okay?" she asked. With all this? With me being here? I thought about lying, about giving her the easy answer, but she deserved the truth. I'm getting there, I said honestly. It's hard. Some days are harder than others, but I'm choosing to heal. I'm choosing to move forward. And I'm glad you're here, Claire. I really am. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the front porch in the cool evening air. I heard the door open behind me, and Tom stepped out. Can I sit? He asked. I nodded, and he sat down beside me. We were quiet for a long time, just sitting there in the darkness, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of traffic. Finally, Tom spoke. I don't deserve you, he said. No, I agreed. You don't. But I'm not staying for you. I'm staying for me. Because I choose forgiveness over bitterness. I choose healing over anger. I choose to believe that people can change, that broken things can be repaired, even if they're never quite the same as they were before. I'll spend the rest of my life earning your trust back, Tom said. I know, I said. And then, tentatively, carefully, I reached over and took his hand. It was fragile, that touch. It didn't erase the pain or undo the damage. But it was a beginning. If you're watching this and you've been betrayed, I want you to know something. Forgiveness is a choice, not a feeling. I didn't forgive Tom because he deserved it. I forgave him because I deserved peace. Secrets destroy. Truth heals. Even when it's painful, even when it tears your world apart, truth is the only foundation strong enough to rebuild on. Claire didn't destroy my marriage. Tom's silence did. But truth gave us a chance to rebuild, to create something new from the wreckage. If you're the one keeping secrets, please tell the truth. The longer you wait, the more damage you do. And if you're the one who's been lied to, know this. You get to decide what forgiveness looks like. It doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. It means choosing to move forward, choosing to heal, choosing peace over bitterness. Later that night, Tom and I sat together in the living room. He picked up his Bible, the same one where I'd found that letter all those weeks ago, and looked at me. No more secrets? He asked. No more secrets, I said. I sat down beside him, and he opened the Bible to Psalm 51, a psalm of repentance and restoration. We read it together, our voices quiet in the stillness of the house. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. We're not the same couple we were before. We're broken. The cracks are still visible, the scars still tender. But we're healing. We're learning to be honest with each other in ways we never were before. We're building something new, something stronger, something real. And sometimes that's enough.